Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Friday Yosia. I am a student of local governance and human rights for Uganda Matters. Today I'm going to talk about the local government, comparing the evolution of local government in South Sudan and Uganda. I'm going to talk about the pre-colonial era and the colonial era and briefly come up comparing the challenges and the advantages of that local government evolution. When you look at Uganda, in particular, pre-colonial era, we see that the social political organizations are not uniform. As you see that there was very many valid system of governance. So societies, we have very many societies that you see at most. These societies, they are having states. If you ask me why I'm saying they're having states, because every society seems to be independent from that period of time. I will not see a state that is a state, a society that is stateless, much as others are not centralized. But we have seen that in Uganda, pre-colonial, there was a rule of kingdoms. We have seen many kingdoms, the Baganda kingdoms. These are some of the examples that we can say to the pre-colonial era. Comparing to South Sudan, you have seen that in South Sudan we have the rule before pre-colonial. We have what we call the Anglo-Egyptian rule that was in 1899. So that rule took for a very long time. And we also see that there's in the middle, from the pre-colonial era, we have seen that the Southern policy that was put in place. This came during the colonial era, when the British started to come in, and this colonial era, this what we call the Southern policy, developed what is called the native administration. When you talk about the native, these are the people of South Sudan who have been there in Sudan for all those long period of time. Initially, before we know Sudan was stateless, and we always say Sudan was uniform, not South Sudan. The North and South, they were all one. Although in the later period, during the World War, the past World War, there was an assumption that Sudan should be independent, and indeed that led to the independence in 1956. So looking back to the native administration, you see that they established what was called the creation of courts, and when you compare to Sudan and Uganda, of course those leaders, the kingdoms, they also have the chieftaincy, and of course they also have, like for Uganda, they have agencies that they send out to the other natives, to the other part of the country. Now, when you look at when the creation of the creation of courts were intended to serve the customary law in Sudan those years. You find that organized work parties also to make sure there is collection of taxes, and also to make sure the chiefs were involved in the local conflict resolutions. That was very, very common up to now. Current generation still exists. There is a lot of tribal communal conflicts that was always rectified. Even currently the government cannot handle, except the local leaders. And we see that there was also administrative chieftaincy that was linked with the government, the local government institution. So this was in Sudan. This is how local government evolved. So comparing to Uganda, we have seen in Uganda the colonial era in 1994. There was 1894 to 1962. The kingdom was established. The kingdom was abolished, actually. there was district that was led by commissioners. Initially, before there was provinces in Uganda, where the commissioner was under the province, and then it shifts slowly from the provincial commissioner to district commissioner and district officers. That was how, during the colonial era, how local government evolved in Uganda. So we also look like the chiefs under them were paid meager salaries, and actually yes, this is what the injustice was in the past during the colonial era. We have seen that the chiefs were paid a very meager salaries, and the chiefs were reporting to the kingdoms. Now, this was how the creation of local government, particularly for the pre-colonial and the colonial era in Uganda and South Sudan. Much as we see in South Sudan, there was at least a provincial states that were established later when it comes to the Second Civil War, which was the SPLA formation that led to the current independence of South Sudan, where the local government was put right. There was proposals, there was a lot of acts that are written, and those acts stipulates what is supposed to be done. The same to Uganda after the independence. Of course, those old things started to be abolished, and the local government started to save weight, where the local act was developed, decentralized government was established, and the services coming down to the people, rule of law is followed. That is exactly, there is no difference between Uganda and South Sudan. Now I'm going to compare South Sudan. We are looking at the challenges. What are the advantages of the evolution? We have seen that the evolution came in long way, shaping way for the local government to work. Now, what are those advantages and disadvantages? I'm looking at the similarities to Uganda and South Sudan. They are both the same because they are all colonized by the British. So when we look at the advantages, we have seen that given the kingdoms, the powers were run by the chiefs. By the kingdom, by the kings, and those officers that are working under the king. In Uganda, the same in South Sudan. We have seen a lot of chieftaincy, and also chieftaincy in Uganda. So we have seen also the other advantage. Buganda were used as an agent bridge to reach down to the other part of the country, and that was the advantage, giving them the powers to reach down to the other people. It's an advantage, much as they are used, but it's also an advantage. And the same to South Sudan, the natives, there were a lot of ties, there are a lot of agreements that are signed through the chiefs, and these chiefs goes down to the tribes, the clans, and that was how colonialism started. And in fact, it happened those period of time. Now, when looking into another comparison is that they use what is called the indirect rule, and that is the same applies in Uganda and South Sudan. This indirect rule have impacted positive for the colonial era. We see that they use in Sudan, they use the colonial era to ensure that they improvise, or they try to keep low cost. And then also they make sure that the administration is very simple. Okay, and we have seen that the other advantage is that also the native administration have led to development of native institutions, and the same in Uganda. Like when you see the structures in Buganda, it has led to development, and these structures have made Buganda the strongest in that era of kingdoms. Now, this is generally the advantages. Now, the disadvantages is that, of course, there was dictatorship in both the rules. When you look in how was it negatively on the evolution of local government in Uganda and in Sudan, and it has come up to today, because dictatorship started long time ago, both in Uganda and South Sudan, and it continues to conquer, and Africa at large. We have also seen lack of citizens' participation. Of course, it was very poor, both in Sudan and Uganda. Where there is dictatorship, there is no participation. We have also seen no democracy. Of course, there was no democracy. Everything is no exercising of willingness to vote in both Sudan and Uganda. The powers were developed for the interest, not to strengthen the colonial rule. So that which was very, very bad thing. The same also in South Sudan. In Sudan, you find that the powers were used to make sure it strengthened the British colonial rule. And that is exactly what happened. This is how local government shaped way. In conclusion, we will say South Sudan and Uganda, they are more or less the same. They are colonized by by the same colonial country, that is the British. And when you look at their system of governance of local government, they are actually the same. When you compare the Local Government Act and the Uganda Act, it's more or less the same. There's no differences. The functions, everything is actually the same. And up to today, after the independence era, now the reforms that are currently in, we have seen that Sudan and South Sudan, they have a very strong relationship. They have a very strong tie in terms of governance. And thank you so much once again for listening, and hope you take note of what the important points. Thank you.